Om. Ariom, and greetings from Niagara Falls. In Canada, we are celebrating Family Day weekend. Tomorrow's a federal holiday. I'm sharing this with you because I feel most bhagya. Bhagya means fortunate, to have such an extensive family throughout the world with different backgrounds. I've often shared with all of you that I grew up in Niagara Falls with 40 blood relatives, comparing it to be like the Indian full house, multiple uncles, multiple cousins, everyone living and eating together. And I thought there's no way I'll have a bigger family, but I do, and it keeps growing. We get to interact with each other regularly in authentic and deep ways. So this Family Day weekend, I express my gratitude to all of you. When we remember the past 2 years, maybe even more, from let's say March of 2020 to March of 2022, I think what people will remember the most is isolation. We had to study from home, we had to work from home, we had to travel in our minds rather than airplanes. Isolation. Those who are not trained in being isolated, because some are trained. That's what we do in silence culture. We train ourselves to be in isolation, only it's called solitude. Those who are not trained in isolation, their propensity is to feel lonely. So people will remember isolation, they will remember loneliness. When one is lonely, what they fight to do is find meaning. There's an emptiness inside, not in a good way, in an unhealthy way. So they're fighting for meaning. And that is why over the past 2 years, there's such a proliferation of conspiracy theories, capitalizing on those who are lonely and are trying to find meaning. As an example, in Canada right now, the Emergency Act has been invoked. That's only done during wartime. And a lot of this is because people, and I'm only using this micro example, feel that the COVID vaccine is a way for the government to track people. That an entity is injected into your body for you to be tracked. What I share to people is, you don't think you're already not being tracked? Through your computers and your phones and so on. What difference does it make if you're tracked in one more way? Our mentorship program can also be called a meaning or meaningful program. It is a program, it is a facility for all of us to find meaning. And if there's meaning, then there won't be loneliness. And if there's no loneliness, there won't be isolation, there will be a sense of solitude. And our crew, our team, all of you are working very hard and very smart to tend to this sense of loneliness by creating forums and facilities for meaning. This morning we had a young adults workshop. we had more than 50 Chinmaya Yuvakendra from all over the world who gathered to feel a sense of belonging rather than a sense of stress. Now, fast forward some hours to this workshop right now. All of our young adults are evolving adults. 24 hours from now, we have our Power Hour class, which is for high school students. So we're working hard and smart to invoke and evoke meaning, and that will most definitely be the focus of tonight's workshop that our advisory committee and our team will be sharing with all of you. My last thought before they begin: our mentorship program is very important to me. I know it's very important to our advisory team and to our coordinating team, and I hope you feel it's important, very important to you also. Right now, we have 133 seekers registered in our program. I've shared with our team that in February, that number should be 150, March 175, and April. By the time we complete one third of this year, we should have 200 seekers in this program. So I'm asking all of you to be ambassadors for this program. Invite your family members, invite your friends, those who are older, those who are younger, and so on, so that when people remember the past 2 years, they will not remember the lack of meaning, but rather they will remember the fullness of meaning. We have a report that has documented what we did last year. Use that report. It is well written. It is very objective. It's a fine way for us to further this program. Once again, a joyous family day to all of us. Our team will continue.
Hariom, everyone. Good to see so many faces. Hariom to Vivekji, Pranams. I'm very excited. My name is Pooja Marai, one of the coordinators of the mentorship program, and I wanted to introduce our speakers for tonight. So we're really excited to have this wellness workshop tonight. And for those of you who are new to the program, we're going to do this on a monthly basis where we bring together all the mentors and mentees, and we bring speakers forth who are young professionals in the Chinmaya Mission community and community beyond, who have some experience and expertise in fields like mental health, climate change, the arts, etc. And we invite them to share the application of oftentimes their work, their secular context in a Vedantic context. So it's a really cool, neat workshop that we do every month. And so we're really excited this month to have a session on building meaningful relationships. So we thought this was an important part of getting this program off the ground as you're building relationships with your mentee or mentor. But think about how you can use a lot of the principles being shared today in other parts of your life, in other relationships that you have. And so we'll focus, first, Megha will be taking us through some of the ethical principles of mentoring. And then also Oma will take us through some activities around and thoughts around reflective listening. And I'll do a quick bio and then I want to hand it over to them. So a little bit about Om and Megha, if you don't know them. So Om grew up attending Balvihar classes at Chinmaya Mission Houston. Many of you probably know him from Houston. He's now landed in Berkeley and Oakland, California, and for many years has been working in community engagement, higher education, and building partnerships with community organizations as part of LinkedIn's inclusion recruiting team. And we've had him as a speaker before, so many brilliant bits of knowledge and an amazing point of view to share. So we're happy to have Om. And then we also have Megha Tailor. She'll be kicking us off. She's a clinical and community psychologist who did her graduate work at DePaul University, NYU, and UCSF. And she provides evidence-based treatments in a private practice setting today. She enjoys working with children, adolescents, families, adults, and communities from diverse backgrounds. So that's a little bit about them. I think it's so cool to hear all these really amazing and interesting backgrounds. I always feel really inspired. And you can always on their behalf, I'm saying reach out to them after if you have questions about their work. The other last thing I'll point out is both Megha and Om are part of our advisory committee. So we have 3 folks who are part of our advisory committee: Rachna Ji, Megha, and Om. And they're here to provide guidance to the program if we run into any challenges, if folks need additional guidance around mental health or challenges that are showing up in their lives or with their mentor mentee. We have this amazing advisory committee that we can work with and reach out to. So we're happy to have them here today. So without further ado, I will start screen sharing and also hand it over to Megha Tailor. You're on mute, Megha.
Sorry, I always do this. Hari Om Pooja, Hari Om Vivekji, to the mentoring team, mentors, mentee. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this workshop today. And yeah, so like Pooja was saying, you guys are kicking off to a new year of the mentoring program. So today we're just going to be talking about some of the moral issues that may come up in the mentoring relationships. And then Om is also going to be speaking about some of the other aspects that are important in building effective mentoring relationships. So before I jump into it, I just wanted us to take maybe 1 or 2 minutes to think about these questions. So Pooja, if you can go to the next slide. So what is most important to me in my role as a mentor? And then what type of mentor do I want to be? So if you just want to take 1 or 2 minutes, you can think about it or you can jot it down. I think you might have had a question like this maybe when you were first applying for the mentorship project, but it might be good to start off this way today. And if folks feel comfortable, they can share in the chat some of the things that they feel is important, but if they feel comfortable. Okay, yeah, connection, a good listener, vulnerability. Mentee leads. Wow, lots of great answers. Guidance without judgment, helping someone with my abilities, mutual benefit, reassurance, acceptance, make a difference, better listener, empathetic. Yeah, these are all really important aspects of a mentoring relationship. And yeah, to be genuine, to listen without judgment, share experiences, fundamentally to connect, guide, empower, authentic. Great. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about we'll touch on some of these aspects as we go through our workshop and even in the discussions that we'll have when we have our breakout session. So let's move on to the next session. So when we're talking about ethical principles, a lot of times mentors are coming to the program with a strong desire to help the more traditional mentoring programs. And at the heart of any mentoring program is the personal relationship that's there between the mentor and the mentee. And that is what kind of facilitates some of the positive development that occurs in the mentee. And that is the goal. Part of the goal is to provide that, to promote that positive development. And at times, problems may arise in the relationship. So today we're specifically kind of looking at some of the moral issues that may come up. And by looking at these issues and kind of using our ethical principles, some guidelines, it can help us not fall for those traps, and also just help us build those meaningful growth promoting relationships with our mentees. And I guess it can also be applied. The mentees can also use some of these aspects with their mentors, and that can really facilitate a strong relationship. So some of the principles that we're talking about today, the first one is promote the welfare and safety of the young person, be trustworthy and responsible, act with integrity, promote justice for young people, respect the young person's rights and dignity. And this is from the American Psychological Association, their ethics code, and it can be applied to folks in the community that are doing this kind of work. And for those that have mentors and mentees that have been a part of the program since last year, some of this may look familiar to you, and it's a good chance as you're starting off this year to reflect on some of these issues. Maybe even later on when we have our breakout session, share if any of these issues came up in your in the past year, or even in other relationships, and then just thinking about it as you're moving forward this year, developing that relationship with your mentee. So specifically the first one, just like it sounds, promoting the welfare. So we're basically what we're trying to do is to benefit the mentee, right, and avoid any harm. This is more from the traditional mentoring literature. And some of the issues that they talk about, to benefit a mentee doesn't seem like it should be that complicated. But I think there could be moral things that may come up, like issues to consider. For example, if there may be competing ideas about what is best for the mentee, and it may be rooted in differing values, cultures, or worldview that may be there between the mentor and the mentee. If there are differences, sometimes it is important to consider and kind of look at the family context from where the mentee is coming from, and that can explain, the decisions that they may be making or how they're viewing, and it just provides a better perspective on where the mentee is coming from. In more traditional mentoring programs where mentors are working with really young kids, oftentimes building that rapport with the primary caregiver is crucial to build a strong relationship. When we're talking about avoiding any avoiding any harm to the mentee, we're talking about these extreme harmful behaviors that may occur, sexual harassment, abuse, or exploitation, and to avoid that. Specifically, we'll talk about that in the next slide. So we can go to the next slide. The idea of exploitation. Often in mentoring relationship, there is a power dynamics that may exist, right? If the mentee is younger, due to the age or the role of the adult, there may be just a power difference, along with their cultural background or class or other types of issues that may be there, which may also make it more likely that there may be some power dynamics that may go on. And most often it's manifested in the beliefs that, or the opinions of the mentor that may be at odds with the experience, values, and belief of the mentee. In this case, training to help the mentor increase awareness of their own privilege in the broader society and helping them expand their cultural knowledge can be helpful. And it doesn't all have to be bad, right? If the mentor does have more privilege in the broader society, based on their position or connections or experiences or other resources, it can also be a form of social capital for the mentees, and it could provide opportunities. So it could actually be useful at times. Another aspect to consider when we're thinking about doing no harm is just boundaries. So those are limits around relationships. So what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in a relationship, right? And having clear and appropriate boundaries are important in having successful relationships. So not engaging in sexual relationships, placing primary importance on the need and the safety of the mentee, trying to avoid a situation where you're entering into personal, professional, financial, or other types of relationship, like multiple roles that could interfere with your objectivity and your ability to work effectively with the mentee. As the relationship gets stronger with the mentee, they may share things with you that are, where more and more you're helping them with things. At times you will have to kind of see your own position and see if it's too much, if it goes beyond the role of what you're supposed to be doing. And in those cases, encouraging the mentee to talk to their parents or other professionals in the mentee's life. Training again and supervision can help with recognizing some of these tricky situations that may occur with the boundaries, or even in limiting just the limits around what, how much expertise you may have in some of the things that the mentees may be coming up with. And that's why we have the advisory board, and you have the mentoring team to kind of help you with all of those things. And getting assistance from them can be really helpful, especially when some of these issues come up. So the next ethical principle, just like it sounds, I think we might have skipped, maybe, there we go. Yeah, is just behaving in a way that you're trustworthy and you're keeping your word and promise. And I think our mentoring team has done a great job of creating guidelines around what the expectations are around contacting the mentees, and different activities and things like that. And I think the more you're engaged in that in a consistent and a reliable way, it's going to really help with that is going to be the basis for the trust that's being built in that relationship. And that's the cornerstone of an effective mentoring relationship. So I think when things are not things to kind of think about, in the literature, they talk about that sometimes relationships do end prematurely and explanations may not be given, right? And in that case, I think mentors may come in with this idealized notion of what the experience is going to be, but maybe the mentee may not be engaging for different reasons. They might be thinking it's deliberate. They might be feeling discouraged, or just if they're successful in other parts of their life, they might feel shame, failure, or sense of helplessness that could lead to avoidance, not really talking to anybody about what's going on, right? So I think training to understand common challenges and different phases of the mentoring relationship can help. If there are issues going on that you're concerned about in the relationship, going to the mentoring program and your pod to kind of seek that support early on can help, right? If termination is inevitable, then just having clear guidelines can help. Accountability and a transition plan can all be helpful. Yeah, I think one slide back. There we go. And then the third principle is act with integrity, right? So just like it sounds, just being thoughtful and honest about the commitment to the relationship, right? So if things do come up, just being clear about what's going on, avoiding setting false expectations. Like we said, that consistency and the reliability is what is the cornerstone of the relationship. So when you say something and it doesn't happen or you don't show up, then it is going to affect the trust in the relationship. There's potential for disappointments, misunderstanding, conflicts, and communication breakdown. And mentors do have more responsibility in trying to figure out what's going on, but the team is also there to support them if there's some kind of misunderstanding or just different expectations that the mentor and mentee might have. And I think our team has done a good job of setting those expectations early on. So both mentor and mentee kind of know what those expectations are, but the ongoing discussion can always be helpful in kind of figuring out how that gets played out in the relationship. And then lastly, this may not be as relevant, but in case you are interacting with the mentee in other spheres, like homeschool, I think it's not as applicable. I think, again, just being mindful of your behavior in whichever context you're in when you're interacting with the mentee. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. I think one back. There we go. Yeah. And then the fourth one is promoting justice for young people. So really exercising good judgment and recognizing the potential biases that you might be carrying based on your background, where you come from, your lived experience, that could lead to overt or covert form of prejudicial treatment of the mentee. I don't think anybody wants to, but I think the unacknowledged prejudice can subtly affect relationships. And these biases may be part of the age, race, gender identity, ethnicity, culture, national origin, sexual orientation, religion, disability, SES, all of these different aspects. And I think pre-match between mentor and mentee can help with that. Training and ongoing supervision and consultations to help avoid making assumptions about the other person, increasing awareness of one's own biases and blind spots, building cultural competency, all of those things can help. And then mentoring can also be a powerful thing in promoting social change. So if you really understand where the mentee is coming from, and if they're different from you, and there may be it may be that you have more privilege than the mentee in the broader society, then really understanding their perspective can help you get involved in the society in a way that can help promote social change that would be eventually beneficial to the mentee. Next slide. And then lastly, respecting the young person's rights and dignity. So it involves respecting the mentee and his or her family's choices, except of course in extreme situations like neglect or abuse or endangerment. So really seeking that understanding about the mentee's own personal goals, desires, or values. Related to the rights, it's really important is the privacy and the confidentiality of the mentees. The more you have a close relationship with the mentee, as things you have that connection with them, a lot of mentees may end up sharing more sensitive information with you, and you have that responsibility to be careful with that information and who you share it with. And otherwise, complex issues can arise around where that information is going. There may be times where you might have to share information, and it involves difficult decision about what information to keep confidential and what needs to be disclosed. And this is mostly the disclosing happens. And I think you guys talked about that in the last session. It usually happens around safety issues, right? So if there's ever an issue of harm to self or others, you would disclose. If there's ever suspicion of mentee being abused or neglect happening, you would need to disclose. Whenever these issues arise, the issue of trust is always the central piece of it. Mentees are sharing these really sensitive private information. And if you do disclose, then there's fear that they're not going to talk about this with you again, right? With that, I mean, if it's safety related, then I think you have to disclose, right? But if it's more minor issues, then it's often great to have a place, an adult, where they can share some things that they may not be able to share with parents or other adults. And I think in that case, their trust is really, not sharing it is going to be really important. But it can be complicated. So I think training around issues of confidentiality, consultation with the mentoring program, even with the advisory board, if safety issues come up, we're there to kind of help with that and to make those decisions if those issues do come up. So yeah, so those are some of the ethical principles. I think there's a question about pre-match. I think when you're assigning the mentee and mentor, you're kind of looking at different characteristics to see that they would be a good match. In the broader mentor-mentee relationship, it has to do with sometimes people match according to ethnic backgrounds or gender or things like that. This is more in the broader mentoring programs. Yeah, but even here, you can kind of look at the different characteristics and see if it would be a match between the mentor and the mentee. So, okay. So yeah, these are some of the ethical principles. We're going to be doing an activity later on. So we'll definitely have a chance to reflect on this. And there will be question and answer at the end. So if there are more questions, we can talk about that. But I'm going to pass it on to Om now, who's going to be sharing other aspects of the mentoring relationship that can be helpful in fostering that meaningful relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, Megha. Hariom, everyone. I am Om. My pronouns are he and him. I think that last phrase you used, Megha, is really the key here. It's this idea of building a relationship. Because on one hand, if you look at the depth, which we just talked about, ethical principles of mentorship, promoting justice, acting with integrity, and you take that and you go to a slide called listening. Maybe many of you and maybe all of us kind of get it to some degree, but the reason that we thought it was really important to put these two topics together is because of what you just ended with, Megha, which was, how do you build true relationship? How do you promote justice for a young person? How do you act with integrity? How do you build trust if you're not building true relationship? And how do you build true relationship in a mentorship program without listening, without being able to understand where the young person's coming from, understanding and sharing where it's appropriate, right? So that's why we're talking about listening today. I really would love for everyone to keep everything we just learned in the last 20 minutes right at the forefront as we're going through some more tactical slides first, but then some more reflective slides later that hopefully allow us to learn from each other on why listening is so important in building those relationships so that we can be our best as mentors. So let's start with the tactics, the next slide. What is reflective listening? What is active listening? I suspect that every single person on this slide has heard a phrase like that before. So to some degree, you're probably coming in with some awareness of what active listening is. And we're all probably coming in understanding how difficult maybe it has been to be great listeners, active listeners, especially in the last couple of years, especially when you've taken away some of the more core elements of how we all connect as humans in the same space, being able to just build a relationship over time. So in this mentorship program, you're going to be, if you haven't yet, I think you already have, a meeting with your mentees in kind of short snippets over time, hopefully consistently, right? As we learned in one of the slides a few slides ago. But it's going to be really important that the time you spend with your mentees is very high quality. And for the mentees to trust you, to know that you're actively listening, I think that's a really key part of building quality relationships. So I'm not going to read every bullet here, but hopefully you've been looking at the slide for a few seconds and kind of understand, like, oh, interesting. Like, I still need to lean forward when I'm on the phone. What does it mean to say your expressions are loud? These are some of the things that I definitely want to discuss, but instead of just speaking them at you, if we go to the next slide, I'd actually love to invite some of our mentors from the last round. This is not the first time you've seen this slide deck, and you've already done a whole round of mentorship. And I'm curious if active listening, or you can take it all the way out to the idea of building relationship through communication, when that really came up for you. Why was that really important? Maybe reflect on your first conversation with your mentee. Maybe you reflect later on in the conversation when the mentee said something like, hey, I really appreciate you listening to me. I really needed to share that. I'm curious if that has come up for any of you in this mentorship program, or maybe beyond. Please feel free to come off mute and just share your story.
I'll bravely unmute. It occurred to me that when I was building my relationship, my mentee Shruti, that it just allowed us, they felt like I was seeing them fully. And that is like felt really special and important, particularly because our mentor-mentee relationship was being initiated virtually, right? So much distance is happening. So the ability to like communicate a level of like eye contact and interest when physical presence isn't there and you can't feel like that tangible magic, it just felt really important. So being able to like echo things that they were sharing with me and like really affirming that they're being heard and seen and that I'm present with them. That's how active listening showed up in our relationship.
And just for the sake of exploring that, I think you and I could share language on that, but what does it mean to be seen? Like, why do you think that matters?
I think it matters for the types of, well, each of us has a really personal narrative, and all of us deserve to have that narrative treated with respect and with care. And not everyone has had the privilege and opportunity to have their personal narrative treated with respect or care. So to really see someone is a practice of accepting someone and saying that like, I may not share your exact experience, but I am walking alongside you and creating an environment where you can be your fullest self. Does that kind of get at what you were thinking?
Yeah, no, I got shivers on it, because I mean, think about the importance of what you shared there, which is not everyone has that opportunity to be seen, to have your personal narrative truly cared for. And to some degree, when we're in these relationships with mentees, I think we could say that about any relationship, but particularly in a mentor-mentee relationship, that's the opportunity we have. That's the incredible possibility that we have, is to be the first or one of the first or an important different person who created space for my personal story. And maybe I'm telling you more of my personal story than I would have told someone else. Maybe I'm sharing it in a way that I'm a little tentative because I haven't been in spaces where people have created that for me in the past. Like, there's a real depth and incredible, I think, joy that comes from when that kind of a relationship clicks, and that's what I hear when you say what you say. Does that bring up anything for others? Does that land?
I can share. For me, what being an active listener, why it's so important with this program is because we're trying to foster more authentic, deeper relationships. I think so often in the secular world, there's a lot more promotion of multitasking, talking to one person while doing a meeting or doing multiple things at once. But for us, we're trying to promote a culture of unitasking. And in order to really foster those deeper relationships where you're talking about things that are beyond superficial, like name and form, you really have to be an active listener to be able to develop that kind of relationship. So.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much for sharing that. I know I opened up the floor to a fairly large group, 50, 60 people. So not everyone was super comfortable sharing, but thank you to both of you for sharing what you did. We are going to break out into some small groups here in 5 minutes. So if some ideas came up for you that you just wanted to share in a smaller group first, I encourage you to do that with your partner or with your group. And then we're going to come back together and maybe we'll get some more voices in the room then. We can go back to sharing the slide deck because I think the next few minutes are going to be really important for us to come together and understand really what reflective listening is, right? You saw that one slide with the blue boxes and you saw some of the tactics of how do you actually listen actively, but I don't think you can just read a slide deck on listening actively. I think you do need to practice it. And so we're going to practice it. All right. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get into a breakout, 2 to 3 people, preferably 2. I just said 2 to 3 just in case some random person gets stuck in their own room. We know that happens on Zoom and I don't want that to happen. The prompt is this. It's what I pasted in the chat a little earlier. It's what we were sharing, might come later. We're going to get into a room and you're going to pick one of the ethical principles from earlier, right? They're listed right there in case you didn't write them all down. And you're going to share a story about a time when you practiced one of them, or when you were in a relationship where you experienced one of them. So maybe you saw someone else practicing one of them. And the point here is to tell a story about that experience. That's going to be person number 1. Person number 2, while they're sharing that story, is going to practice active listening. All right. And so you'll be in a small group, 1 or 2 people. So you should be actively, echoing to Nina's point or to nodding along, eye contact, all the stuff that we just talked about, practice it. And after the person is finished with their story, you're going to take some time to just reflect on what that experience was like for both of you. And I'd love for the speaker to share anything that they observed in the listener. And I'd love for the listener to share what it was like to be an active listener versus someone who is just hearing a story, not actively practicing. And then we're going to do that whole thing for 3 minutes and we'll flip roles. Okay, so the story should probably be around 1 to 2 minutes, no stress on the exact amount of time, but fill that space with some great reflection back and forth and then flip roles. And we're going to do that for a total of 6 minutes. So when we come back in those 6 minutes, we're going to get some great big group discussion going on some of the stuff that y'all learned from each other and anything you want to share. So if we go to the next slide, as we're creating those breakouts, keep in mind a few things when you are an active listener. 2 ears, 1 mouth is like the easiest way to think about it. It's the thing that jolts me back into listening mode when I feel that I'm already starting to come up with my response, when I feel like I'm already starting to have a narrative or have a story of my own to kind of build off that other person's story. It's a good reminder that really what I'm here for right now. I have 2 ears, I have 1 mouth, let me shut one of my mouth, my mouth and like listen in. Mirroring emotions is a really important thing. Sometimes I think we can be in spaces where we think listening is just about like staying silent and just letting the person share. But as we all know, if you have the opportunity to get in there and be like, oh, that must have been really tough. Like, well, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more. Those things can be really important in helping the speaker feel comfortable in sharing their story. And we talked about storytelling already, but that's one thing. If you're sitting there thinking, I don't know how to be an active listener one way or the other, think about asking for more stories. Right? When a person shares something like, yeah, there was a time when acting with integrity was really important, and they start going into kind of like an explanation of it instead of really embodying it, that's an opportunity as an active listener to share like, hey, have you ever experienced that? Can you tell me about what that actually felt like for you? Okay, any questions? So it's a total of 3 minutes each, story plus reflection, story plus reflection. Are we ready with the breakouts? Okay, thanks so much, Nina. We'll see you back here in 6 minutes, everyone. Hurry up, everyone. Welcome back. I believe that's all of us now. Yeah. So I was just sharing, some of you may have heard, but instead of putting a slide back up, I think in the spirit of active listening, I've pasted some questions into the chat box, and I would love to hear people's reflections from that activity, especially for those for whom it might have been a little new. If you felt like you were practicing something, would love to hear how that went. What was it like for you to be an active listener? Could you sense a difference? I won't call on people, but in case you're there, I noticed Galpesh, Ricky, Maya, Nina, Pooja, y'all talked about listening early on when we asked what kind of mentor you want to be. So if you need a little prod, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I can just share really quickly. So one thing that I mentioned on Zoom is that there's like the self view. You can hide your self view. And so it's kind of funny when there's just two people and you can see yourself beside, and then you also have your, the person that you're speaking to. So eventually I ended up hiding my self view. And that was a really great way to also like actively listen and just really focus on that person. And I think that's just the joy of technology right now. So I think a lot of us are maybe meeting with our, mentees or, people on Zoom. And so that might be something that might be helpful.
It's brilliant. That's top right for everyone. Top right of your square. You click the little 3 dots and you click hide self view. It is a jarring experience on Zoom to hide self view because then you realize how often you've been staring at yourself versus others during every meeting over the last 2 years. Highly recommend it. Just to push yourselves. Great recommendation, Isha. I got a great reflection here. It felt more engaged and comfortable in the conversation. Would you want to come off mute and share more? Vivekji doesn't do that. We are all aspiring seekers here. So some of us may. Just want to create that space for those who do. I do that. How about this, the second question? How was it to mirror the talker's emotions? I know it was a short story. I know it was only 2 or 3 minutes each, but what did that feel like? In what ways were you able to mirror emotion?
I think it's really dependent on how many people, let's say in like a Zoom environment, are present. When it was 2 of us mirroring the emotions, looked like smiling or nodding, or if somebody says something surprising, reflecting that. If you have the flexibility to be able to unmute, I think those small nuggets of agreeing or disagreeing can be helpful. So if you have the opportunity to be like in a 2 or 3 person group, I think that's a big part of it, or was for us.
Yeah, great points. And I think even if you're on phone, when you're not able to see each other, you got to be able to sense a little bit of where the emotional pull might be. And I think those audible cues of being able to jump in, like those things really matter. And it was funny how much matters at a time when someone's right at that edge of, do I share more or do I just keep it at that surface level? And I don't know if they care. They haven't said anything in the last 45 seconds. Maybe I'll stop. Right? That happens. Great point. Anything else that worked well or didn't? And now let's zoom out of this activity. But in general, when you think about when things have gone well in terms of being a listener.
Something that didn't work well for me, and I didn't realize until you talked about it, Om, and then I was in the breakout room with my partner, is how often I'm focusing on what I want to say next while someone else is talking, and I'm not, actively listening. And I may be like nodding my head and saying or something, but I'm not actively doing it. So I was trying to be really cognizant of that during this activity.
A lot of nodding heads, by the way. I don't know if you noticed. A lot of us were nodding our heads right there because maybe we were coming up with our response to that while you were talking about it. It was very meta. Thank you for that. Ricky, Maya?
Hey there. I was just going to say this is such a fantastic session, by the way. When I reflect on my interaction with my mentee, there was this one time I felt so happy that out of the blue, he had messaged me and said, I need to talk to you. And it basically indicated there was something that was happening that was in his mind. And the next day I had a conversation with him, and the entire conversation, it kept going. And it was only at the end of it that he realized that he hadn't asked me anything about myself. He was just talking because he just wanted to let it out. And that just felt like it was so important for him to actually bring it out. And when I reflect back on the conversation, there are a couple of things. One is, many times we tend to ask questions which are very direct, which we want to take it in a particular way. But what I realized is sometimes I switched and I just said, tell me more, which is not trying to get him to a particular point. It's just giving him this, almost this permission to take it wherever he wants to take it to. And the second thing I realized is also the pause before you speak something back, because there's always this urge to say, even if it's a question or mirroring, to actually say it right after they finish, but giving that pause, thinking and then talking was quite useful as well.
I feel like you just named two terrifying things: pausing and then just tell me more. Right? It's something about how we're conditioned to engage with each other in our society that we don't feel super comfortable pausing or just saying, tell me more. And maybe it's what you're naming. That was an amazing point, that we want to take the conversation somewhere. So it's showing up in the way we reflect and guide a conversation. But especially early on, when someone's trying to open up and share something, I think that's a brilliant way to approach it. It's just tell me more. It's a very freeing invitation as a speaker for someone just to say, tell me more. I'm like, I can go anywhere with that? Really? Like, you'll just listen to me no matter what I say? It's really wonderful. We are coming up on time. I'd love to bring Megha back in real quick. Megha, I know you and I were talking about this over the last few weeks as we were just discussing this session, and I got to reflect a little on your talking points in this listening piece, but anything coming up for you and just that we used to talk about why this is so important in terms of what you also shared?
Yeah, I think you said it, like, I think between what we talked about in the beginning and all these things that we're practicing right now, it's really, I mean, these are the aspects that's going to create that authentic relationship that we're talking about, right? And I think kind of with what Vivekji was saying, these relationships is what creates that community. The more authentic relationships we have, the more authentic community that we have, where we feel less lonely and just more connected, right? So yeah, it's all coming together.
Love it. Well, Pooja, I see you come off mute. I think we're back to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Hari Om, for letting us have this conversation with you. It means a lot to us. We get to be in this community in this way.
Thank you for opening our eyes to some new perspectives, and we really enjoyed hearing you all speak. So thank you for the time as well. We're going to conclude. So how this will work normally is we'll conclude at the end of the hour. We're going to do a couple of announcements from our team, and then our speakers, Megha and Om, are going to stay on a little bit longer. If you do have any Q&A, we'll have some time for Q&A. Feel free to stay on if you have questions for them, for some discussion. So I'll hand it over to our team, who just has a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll quickly conclude.
Sure, I can get started. Thank you, Pooja. Thank you, Megha and Om. That was awesome. Such a good way for us to start this course with all the insights that I think will provide such a good foundation for our mentor and mentee relationships. So just a few reminders about some of the guidelines for this program. So the first thing is that really consistency is what helps us to build those meaningful connections. And so mentors and mentees, we really recommend that they meet at least twice a month for a minimum of 30 minutes. You're of course welcome to meet more often than that, but we would sort of suggest that you should at least meet at that twice a month cadence in order to get the consistency. The second thing is, it's lovely to see many of you at the workshop. Please continue to attend those monthly with your mentee or your mentor. Hopefully the ideas that are shared here can prompt some lively discussions in your one-on-one conversations. The third thing is that we are also holding an office hours every month, and this is really an informal place where you can stop by for a chat with members of your pod. And so this is really a forum that helps us to build that collaborative community in which we can really share our experiences, share our learnings, all for the benefit of other participants. Unlike the workshops, the office hours are not mandatory, but we do highly recommend them as something to attend. And then the final thing is the stamp card. So after each session and after each workshop, please do update the stamp card so that we can keep track of all the touch points that we have and be accountable for our participation in the program. So in summary, please make sure to meet twice a month, continue attending the workshops, feel free to join our office hours, and please mark the stamp card. With that, I'll pass on to Lavanya for a couple more announcements, and then we'll go to a Q&A.
Hari Om, everyone, and special Hari Om also to Om and Megha. Our gratitude again for joining us and sharing such useful information as we kick off or as we are a month into our new year with this program. So these are a few announcements in terms of what's going on with the greater community opportunities for satsang, and the links for joining these opportunities are going to be shared in the chat, so pay attention there. So number one, join our Prithvi Seva Sangha workshop on Sunday, February 27th. This will be from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern time, and it will be on the topic of Climate Change 101. Number two, we'll have our workshop on our Shastras, our environment, which will commence next week from February 27th to March 2nd from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern time. Our Shastras reveal that the names and forms of our environment are an expression of our infinity, and the workshop will guide us to this inclusive vision as well as inspire us to live a more harmonious lifestyle. Number three, starting March 1st, Mahashivratri, until April 16th, which is Hanuman Jayanti, we will be, during Meaningful Mornings, we will deepen our study of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita by concentrating, collaborating, and contemplating together as we commence chapter 6. And as you can see, these details are being shared in the chat. And so we will conclude this session formally, and as Prem shared, as Pooja shared, whoever wants to stay on longer for the Q&A can. So I will just chant Om once. Om. Hari Om, everyone.